Hello.
Hey, how are you doing?
You guys there?
It's time.
It's the appointed hour.
It is. It's the appointed hour. It's very pointed.
Yeah.
It's
a pointy.
The number 4. It's very pointy. It's the pointiest of the numbers.
It's not. It's only 4 for some people. Don't be time zonist.
There'll be 4 soon, even for them.
True. It won't be long.
Within the next 12 hours, I predict.
It's true.
Hi, Alexa.
Hi, Alexa. Hi,
and Karen. How you doing?
Yeah, first arrivals today.
Oh yeah. And
Wendy, you look.
Wendy.
It was a good effort. I think since you left Guelph, things have gone a little wonky, but
Hi Donna, hi Christy.
Hi another Wendy.
Hi
Sandy.
All the Wendy's and the Sandys
Hi,
and the
Donna.
Christys and Anne-Karine. Oh, from Lilyhammer. She always
I know.
all the way from Lilyhammer.
We know you're from Lilyhammer by now.
Amazing.
We know, but it's always worth
Gail
mentioning.
Rushgold. Hi Phoebe. Hi Allison.
Hi guys, girls, women, people. We're not supposed to say guys anymore as a universal thing, and I'm struggling to find the.
Hi Stephen, our boy.
Oh, how dare you?
There could be. You could all be boys. I don't know.
No one.
Or nobody boys. Or no. There are no boys or girls left.
No.
Ever.
No.
It's okay. Everybody is good. Everybody is good.
Hi,
We are all
Allison.
welcome here. This is a safe place.
Apparently not. Hi,
Anna, love you. Diana and Manelia and Santa Lucia, that's nice. And Rosanna and Lynn and Laura. Oh, we've got more than 125. We should go.
Oh my goodness, what are we still doing here saying names?
I know. We're
It's
saying
great.
names.
Gathering room today, guys. I hope you enjoy it. Remember, if you miss anything, you can always watch it again afterwards on your Facebook or on your YouTubes. I will let you talk now.
Yes.
It's Martha o'clock.
So you guys, a lot of you have written in questions that don't always get picked up because it's a whole topic about trauma. That is right, Laura. Trauma. A lot of you guys know what trauma is, what it means verbally, and a lot of you know what it means viscerally because you've had things happen to you that would be classified as trauma. Now, trauma is usually defined as having an experience that's outside what we would consider the normal range of okay experience. Like it goes into a range where it is not okay, and people don't generally talk about it, and it's not considered part of ongoing society. That said, one of the interesting things about a traumatic experience is that even if you are not, other people looking at an experience would not consider it to be out of the ordinary. If you feel helpless and out of control, you can have a very innocuous seeming experience from the outside feel traumatic from the inside. So an example, for instance, very mild, but suppose you have a creepy grandmother. Everybody hates it when grandmothers are always good. This is what I've learned through years of talking about having a grandmother who was kind of nuts. But I remember having to express affection to her and like come near her and being very frightened of her. That to me was a little bit traumatic. Now, I've had much more traumatic things happen, but it turns out even if you go through something really, really physically difficult, if you don't go into a state of helplessness, you don't have a lingering trace of trauma in your psyche to the same extent that will happen if you feel helpless. The primary signifier of true trauma is a sense of absolute helplessness and being out of control. That kind of situation can range from something very mild as like kissing your grandma to something very, very traumatic like living in a war zone. Either way, it has a really distinct sort of imprint on the psyche. And I use the word psyche advisedly because here, this is the whole problem. Freud, when he first started talking about psychological illness and talking about this like it was a real thing, he found a lot of people who told him stories of trauma. They had various psychological symptoms. They had, for example, hysterical blindness or paralysis where they couldn't see or they couldn't move even though there was nothing medically wrong with them. Stuff like that. So he started talking to them, and almost universally, they told him stories of awful things that happened to them. Sometimes where they were just forced to hold still while someone fondled them inappropriately. Sometimes when they went through something truly horrifying, like seeing a murder Either way, Freud at first thought, once they talked about it completely, they had this weird kind of storage system. So the feeling that they had at the time of the experience was stored in some core, like almost like toxic waste or something. Around that would be these physical symptoms of numbing, and sometimes there would be complete lack of information. There would be complete amnesia for the trauma itself. And around that would be a layer of coping mechanisms, including things like having outbursts of rage when someone got too close to a topic that was sensitive, or drinking a lot because you don't want to feel your feelings, stuff that's pretty familiar to us now. So long story, a little bit shorter, Freud came out with the talking cure, and then later he went back and said everybody fantasized everything, because how could so many people be traumatized? Now that's been pretty much discredited, that people in Vienna were just making stuff up. They had those traumatic experiences, and he was right the first time. So now people have swung back in the psychiatric community, have mainly swung back to treating trauma as a primary thing that can be addressed in like therapy. And if you have some type of trauma, it's often misdiagnosed, by the way. We live in the age of biochemical psychiatric thinking. So often it'll be misdiagnosed as a biochemical problem, like bipolar disorder or even schizophrenia, things like that, when actually what you're dealing with is post-traumatic stress. It mimics the symptoms of a lot of different things. And Freud was partly right in saying that trauma can be cured by talking about it. If you do talk, if you remember the thing, connect whatever happened, connect it to the sensations and the symptoms, like the drinking or the freaking out or whatever it is. If you're able to recall the incident and speak to it coherently, including a description of your emotions to at least one compassionate witness, and preferably to more than one, so 3 or 4 times. It doesn't have to be told and told and told and told, but 3 or 4 times to a compassionate witness, a lot of the symptoms will resolve. Okay, so this led to psychotherapy as we know it. People talking forever in therapist's office about sad things that happened to them. I'm a big fan. I mean, I am alive because I had 2 therapists in my life, and both of them talked me through traumatic things that happened to me when I was a child, and it really, 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 really helped. That said, I continued to have a lot of symptoms of PTSD, like high anxiety, insomnia, still get physical symptoms sometimes, because it turns out that talking is not all we need to resolve a situation that happened to our whole bodies. Even if we were just sitting somewhere, forced to sit in the corner in school or something, your whole body was going through the experience. So what we now know, and what therapists are finally learning, is you have to bring your whole body to the table when it comes to healing from a trauma. And again, we've all had traumas. They can be little or they can be big, but the equation of connecting back to them, feeling the feelings, telling a compassionate witness, and then somehow bringing the body into the equation, that lines up no matter what the size of the trauma. So I've seen it work for people who had tiny traumas. I've seen it work for people in Africa who've been through things you can't even imagine. I was just reading a book about it's called Altered Traits. It's by Daniel Goleman, and I can't remember the co-author's name, but a couple of Harvard dudes. And it's about how meditation changes the brain. And one of the things they found is that, well, being able to meditate on these things and get calm can actually help you bring the trauma into a state of a calm witnessing presence where you can be your own compassionate witness. Great. But the story I want to tell you is that they went to Asia because that's where you find all the most accomplished meditators. And they went to a group of very accomplished, I think they were Tibetan meditators, and they were going to test someone's brain while he meditated in front of the other lamas. So it took them forever. They brought all this equipment and they put like 140 electrical wires on this guy's scalp. And he just looked like he was being attacked by some sort of weird, huge bacterium, you know? So they pulled back, and here's this guy with his head just wired up from here to Sunday. And the whole audience broke out laughing. And the Americans were like, oh, what did we do? They thought that they were laughing because he looked funny with wires on his head. Nope. They were laughing because the test was going to be on how the brainwaves reacted to loving kindness meditation. They were studying compassion and where it lives in the brain. And the guys were laughing because they said, you think compassion lives in your head? These guys had been watching their own internal lives for so long, and they knew quite accurately that compassion lives largely in the actual heart, but also in the entire neural system of the body. It's not in the head. It's like, can you imagine if somebody said, we're going to test compassion, and here we've got this volunteer and we've wired him up, and then they pull back the curtain and everything is attached to his genitalia and nothing else. To the monks looking at this, it was that ridiculous, because the whole body is brought into compassion, and the whole body reacts to trauma, and the whole body needs to be witnessed and validated and calmed in the aftermath of trauma. So all of this just to say that I know a lot of you guys are like me out there. You've been to therapy for trauma, and it helps a lot, and we're so grateful to our therapists. And it's a little bit like, my head is doing well, except for the anxiety, but the rest of my body is still freaking out. So what I wanted to talk about were a couple of ways that you can release trauma from your body. And the interesting thing about this is that it works without the retelling and retelling and retelling. I remember once a lady came to me for coaching, and she had experienced a trauma when she was 3, and it wasn't in the scheme of things, it wasn't that awful. Her father went on a business trip. That was the whole trauma. She missed him. It was rough. I get it. But she'd written up the anecdote and laminated it and taken it to 17 separate therapists. And she said, you're my last hope. If you can't fix me, I will remain broken. And I was like, oh, this will not go well. Because for one thing, the fact that she'd laminated this story kind of spoke to the way her body had now encoded the trauma. She'd put it into the body over and over and over. She carried it physically around with her, and it had become more deeply entrenched. So how do you get a trauma out of the body? It works very much as if you've encased the trauma in cement. And the way it wants to come out is to be shaken up, literally. So you guys, some of you know that I wrote a book that was partially about shamanism, and I talked to a whole bunch of medicine people from different traditions. Almost all of those people go into a shaking trance before they go into the healing state. And they're shaking out various types of trauma from their own bodies. And then I've seen them actually touch someone who's sick and let themselves shake, so that they are shaking vicariously for the person who's traumatized. And I've actually felt this myself. I will admit it. I come close to someone who's been traumatized and start to shake. And sometimes I've just lain awake in bed and shaken violently, but without a tremendous amount of emotional stress. It literally is the body shaking free. If you haven't heard of this and you want to do it, look up Peter Levine, Levine. His first book is called Waking the Tiger. I came to him indirectly, but he does a really great job of helping people shake. Another one is David Berceli. Look him up online. He does things called trauma release exercises, where he just travels the world and helps people shake until mostly war trauma is gone from their bodies. So shaking, physically shaking, is absolutely key. As a way to shake, another really powerful thing that I do not do is dance. I remember I went to a thing on female circumcision, in Kenya in this village and heard these ghastly stories of what these women had gone through being circumcised. And then I watched them go outside, these tall, gorgeous women, and just dance and dance and dance. And they would jump and jump. And I watched them and I'm like, oh, that's how they deal with it. They're shaking themselves free. And they were so relaxed. There's this beautiful story in a book called The Body Keeps the Score, which is also a really great book about trauma, about someone sitting at the Truth and Reconciliation, what were they called, tribunals in South Africa after apartheid fell. Horrible atrocities had happened. And this man, this therapist, Van der Kolk, his name is Bessel van der Kolk, he was in, I think it was Soweto, with a group of women who'd been traumatized. And he said they sat there just vacant-eyed. You know, they'd seen all these horrible things. There were still guns being fired right like a mile away. They could hear fighting. And he thought, I don't know how to work with these people. And then one woman started to sing and rock at the same time. And then they all started to sing. And if you've ever heard South African singing, oh, unbelievable. Listen to what Paul Simon did with their music. And then they would start to do this dance where it's very jolting. And they all started to do it together. And this synchronized jolting has been shown not only to let go of trauma, but it turns on a switch in the brain that connects you with the other people who are moving like that. I talked about this a few weeks ago. It's called the hive mind. And it switches off a sense of being separate and on a sense of being united with the group of people that are all moving together. So that is incredibly healing, because part of the legacy of trauma is isolation. So bringing it back by dancing or shaking with other people is a shortcut in the brain to help begin releasing trauma. So all of this has taken me 17 minutes to talk about. This is why I haven't answered your questions on trauma in the first place. It gets really like technical, but on the other hand, it's bizarrely concrete and easily done once you actually know how it works. It is about bringing the body to the party. I do want to say one final word as the gracious badger comes back in, and that is, you really do need someone to hug you. We are primates, and we do not look for safe places when we're in trauma recovery. We look for safe people. And if you cannot, if you can't get someone you love in your home to give you a hug, then get a dog. They can be very cuddly. If your dog won't cuddle you and your cat absolutely refuses, you know, go to a trauma recovery group where the other people in the group will hug each other, because the natural tendency is to respond with touch. So monkeys, baby monkeys that have been horribly traumatized, just sit like this. And I've seen films of them, but if they put normal little monkeys in with them, the normal monkeys will try to play with them. And when they don't respond, the normal monkeys will just do this, and they'll just stay there for like days. Yeah. So those are the things that you have to do. And I wish I could say there's a way that we could all just sit quietly in smart business attire and talk our way through it. But no, you've got to shake, you've got to cry, and you've got to be hugged. The end.
So I wanted to start with a question from Lara, which I think is quite interesting, because she says, Lara being someone we know to have a very powerful mind.
Yeah.
She says, is this true even though trauma is received and perceived through the mind?
Depends on how you define the mind, because the mind, the type that we're talking about, you're talking about beta waves in the brain, the analytical thoughts that are very high frequency in the brain. But every neuron in the brain is linked to every neuron in the body. So even when you're in what we would call pure mind, you're still in a body. And everything you think is creating an environment. If you vividly imagined, if you were on some kind of drug and you really thought there was a bear in the room, your body, people die of fear because they believe something is present that's going to kill them. They literally drop dead from fear because what they have imagined is so powerfully frightening. So yeah, even though the mind is how we perceive trauma, the entire body gets involved. The mind affects the body and the body affects the mind. this whole idea that it only goes top down, mind to body, that's where Freud got it a little wrong. It comes, well, there are two ways of influencing trauma. One is called by psychologists top down, and that is analytical to body. The other one is bottom up, and that's up through the vagus nerve, from the gut, the heart, the solar plexus, the throat, and everything to the brain. Just so you know, there are more nerves running from the heart to the brain to inform the brain than there are nerves running from brain to heart. The heart is actually in charge. So yeah, it's the same thing. The mind and the body aren't separate.
Love that.
Yeah.
So Donna asks, what happens when a trauma results in detaching from your body? How do you reconnect so that meditation or connection can soothe the body?
The first thing is you have to find a safe environment. So safety is, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy, the very first thing before you need food, before you need water, before you need shelter from the rain, is a safe space to just hunker. And until you get that, you won't be able to reconnect. But once you do get that, the thing we've got going for us is that the body mind wants to heal. And so it's pushing upward. Like fragments of trauma will be pushing upward. And the moment you're in a safe enough space, they'll erupt into a sensory full reliving. So it might be that you have a safe geographic place. You move away from the place where you were abused or whatever. It may be that you have a safe relationship where you know that your heart is seen. It may be that your therapist is a safe person. All it takes is safety, and the stuff erupts up and reconnects because it's trying to. It's not something you have to do. It's a natural tendency, like those little flowers that grow up through the concrete, and you see them cracking asphalt, these little blades of green. It's stronger than you think. What they call Dylan Thomas called the force that through the green fuse drives the flower. Boy, that's strong. And it's always working for you. Yeah.
Brilliant. Alexa asks, Martha, what is the most helpful thing to remember when mind is in PTSD state and you have the trauma glasses on?
Write letters to yourself from inside and outside the trauma state. It's really helpful to use family systems theory on your own inner self. There's a part of you that's terrified all the time and little and young. Let that part of you write a letter to the rest of you, put it aside, and then say, okay, now I'm going to step forward and be the collected adult. And I'm going to say, here's what I see in you, scared little one. And that way you can go back and forth and you can learn to diffuse the intensity and and heal the split between the two. So have them write to each other. Writing exercises have been shown to be really powerful. They can often make people feel a little upset right after the writing exercise. If someone says, write about the worst thing that ever happened to you. But in one study, people who wrote about the worst thing that ever happened to them, as opposed to people who just wrote what they did that week, 6 months later, they were still doing better on all these measures of health and psychological soundness and everything. Even though it upset them initially, writing it out and then writing back especially is incredibly healing. And the effects of one time doing that can be measured for months biologically.
Wild, isn't it?
It really is, yeah.
Absolutely wild. So Anne-Marie asks, what if you feel like a trauma is repressed? Is there a way to use techniques to help recover events that take a toll unconsciously?
Yeah, I used to, I had repressed certain things and I hadn't repressed certain things. I had scars for which there was no remembered explanation. Then when I remembered it, it was like being attacked by a tiger. Ah! And completely sidelined me. And I tried to tell a few people and they all said, just let it go. Just let it go. And I was like, okay, if I said there's a tiger loose in my house and it keeps attacking people and killing them, and you tell me to let it go, don't I kind of have to catch it first? It's not like I was in control of how I remember the trauma. So if there's stuff that you've repressed, you feel it, and people would say to me, how could you forget something like that? And then remember, that's just stupid. You wouldn't forget. Yes, almost everyone has partial amnesia, at least partial amnesia for extreme trauma, including war veterans where it was all on film, everything that happened to them. So yeah, traumatic amnesia is very real. But you have this feeling like there's a tiger loose in you, and you're afraid to be in a room quiet without something distracting you. You may be afraid to go to sleep. You may have nightmares because it's trying to come out. That's what you have to remember. It wants to be integrated. It wants to set you free. So I realized when people told me, let it go, that I had to do exactly the opposite. I had to let it get me. And to do that, I had to have a safe place. And I remember I would have nightmares about being killed by a leopard during this time or shortly after. And it was horrible until I realized in my dream and outside of the dream, I was afraid to go to sleep until I said, oh, I'll just let it kill me. And then I had a dream where the leopard killed me. And it was attacking me, tearing me apart with its claws and trying to swallow my head with its jaws. And in the dream, it swallowed me, but it also went into me. And I woke up and I could remember things that had happened, but I also felt whole in a way I hadn't before. By the way, that's considered a classic dream in medicine world too, to have the dream that you're being killed. But medicine people tend to have histories of trauma that they've then integrated because that's what they're trying to work to heal in a lot of people. So all of this just to say, if you've got a repressed memory, it's like the feeling, oh, I can't remember the name of that actor. Is it Duncan? Is it Dusty? Oh, Dustin Hoffman. Okay, that feeling, I knew something, then I forgot it, but it was right in there. That's the feeling of having repressed it. And then when it comes out, it's not like it's a question. You remember what happened, like it, wham! Okay, for that to happen, you must be in a safe environment. So if you think you've got a repressed trauma, please, 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 please go to a therapist, preferably someone who's done trauma therapy. And then you can go to groups and you can have EMDR and you can, there are all these fabulous modalities now. But remember, safe place, safe place, safe place. Does that get to the essence of that question? Oh, and a method of remembering it is the safe place makes them come up.
There you go. There's a few people sort of talking about like, how do you let yourself shake? And Jen asks, is jumping on a little trampoline similar? Could you maybe, I think
That's
some
great,
people
yeah.
are new to the TRA.
I remember teaching you this in Africa,
Yep.
and I used an analogy that helped you, so I will use it too.
Yeah.
What David Berceli does, and I had a session with him, he's really the greatest in the world, and he makes you tire your muscles out by doing certain exercises until like your thigh muscles get really tired, like you squat until your thigh muscles get really shaky, and then they start to shake, and then you let it happen. So you go into, that's one way, go into just a light bending your knees, so you're in a half squat, or you're standing on the floor, but your knees are halfway bent, and hold it there. And after a while, your muscles will get tired. And then if you stay, they'll start to shake. At this point, the only thing I can compare it to is it's like when you're potty trained as a kid and you can pee or not pee. You can hold it, which most of us are holding back our shaking all the time in this culture. And then in the appropriate setting, the little room, you can allow it to come forth, the urine stream. Well, when your legs start to shake, you can either stop it or you can let it flow. And the way you let it flow is just relax, go limp. And what will happen is if you let your legs shake for a while, other parts of your body will then start to shake. And it just takes on a life of its own. And I have to tell you one story before we go, because this may be the closest I ever came to landing in prison. I was with 5 women on that same trip to the Mesa Mara, and we were staying at this camp, and one of our fabulous coaches, Susan Baghdadi, brilliant master coach, had just been to David Berceli's shaking workshop, and she's really good at this stuff. So she's like, I'll teach you to do it. So there were like 5 women, we're all like, let's do it. So we were all shaking. And it got like, we started with our legs shaking and she was teaching us different things. And then she'd be like, here goes my head. And this kind of stuff would start happening. And then there were people like hopping around on the grass and people lying there twitching. And I looked up and a butler was coming down the path with a stack of towels and he had just frozen with his eyes like this, because he was seeing 5 crazy American women, basically, I think in his mind, performing witchcraft. And he was like, and we're like, hi, how are you? Because we don't care, we're Americans. And then, so he went away, didn't bring us the towels. And then like 5 minutes later, a guy with a huge gun came just strolling along. We were like,
Nothing, just
hi,
nothing.
don't mind us. And yeah, we did not get arrested for witchcraft, but I'm pretty sure they thought that's what we were doing.
Rumors about Americans then.
Rumors about Americans. So yeah, that did not end in a traumatic event happening, but it did release a lot of traumas.
I'll tell you, there's a lot of people suggesting that we should do a dance-based retreat, and I just wanted to say we tried to do something like that once.
Okay, that is one of the biggest traumas I've ever been through.
That's not our modality. That might be your modality. It's not our thing.
It was literally, yeah, it was rough. It was rough.
So you guys, by all means,
do a dance retreat. It's amazing. We film it. We'll watch. We will watch with alacrity. But yeah, no, not us so much.
But we'll shake.
We'll shake.
God, we'll shake.
We'll shake till the damn cows come home.
We'll shake it.
Oh, and by the way, cows do shake. All animals shake after they've been traumatized, and that's why they don't have PTSD. Yeah.
And on that note,
so this has been very nuts and bolts. I feel like I've been doing like auto repair, because it really it's auto repair. Like self-help is auto repair. But it's really, really helpful. It's really, really useful. And if you bring your body into your trauma recovery, everything goes so much better, and you heal, and things get awesome. And I just really want you guys to feel that.
We love you. Look after your hearts.
Love you.
Bye.